City, have you ever heard of an officer called a CXO? You've heard of CEO. You've heard of COO.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You've heard of
CFO.
Yes. CIO, Chief Information Officer. Have you heard of CXO?
I've even heard of CECM.
Even CC.
Even CS.
You've heard of CS?
Even CSO. So, have you heard of CXO?
No, I haven't actually.
Yeah?
No, I haven't.
You haven't heard of CXO?
No, I haven't.
A CXO is Chief Experience Officer. What do you think that person does in an organization? Build your experience. He's the one who checks whether you come here with a relevant 5-year experience.
That you said.
No, that probably is new terminology for what we used to call an HR. Yes.
So do you think?
I think so, because
experience,
because
HR.
Somebody who looks at the wheretofores of how an organization functions, or that of the individuals in the organization, that's a human resource function. Yes, and that process is an experience after all. Yes. Unless you're telling us that the organization now has
something different.
A social welfare department, and this is the head of social welfare department.
Let us pass this around. What do you think a CXO does?
A CXO. Maybe somebody who ensures that your experience, whether it's from an internal point of view as employees or an external point of view as clients, those who will meet or engage with the organization, that your experience is optimum and efficient from beginning to end.
Okay. Well, you've done well. You've tried.
Thank you.
Let's bring in our guest, Vivian Mwende, who's the head of programs at the Independent Medico-Legal Unit. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Latiff.
Very good. What do you think a Chief Experience Officer does?
I think I like what she said, but it's very interesting. We are creating more opportunities and more positions, so I'm worried about that. But I think with somebody who's...
position if you want. Would you want to create one?
No, I think we have
Chief
enough.
Head of Programs at IMLU.
You can do whatever you want.
I don't know if they think people are lying, that when you come to this particular job, you said you have 5 years of experience, but when you come, it shows you have 2. I don't know.
Martin Mavenjina is the Senior Program Advisor for Transitional Justice at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. See, that's a big title. And Martin, good morning.
Good morning. Morning, Latiff.
What do you think a CXO does?
I think a CXO is somebody who actually is tasked with ensuring that the people that you manage, the people that are employed in specific entity, gain commendable experience over the years. Yes.
So, according to Google, a Chief Experience Officer drives revenue and growth by making strategic improvements to the company's customer experience and employee experience programs. CXOs, which are also referred to as the Chief Customer Officer or the Chief Customer Experience Officer, sits in the C-suite. It's a Chief Customer Experience Officer.
Good.
Sasa hiyo na hii mambo utaona kwa dunia tu. Now, those people called CXOs, they're meeting. There's a Customer Obsession Leadership Summit.
Oh, there are many.
In 2024. There are many. Building a culture of customer obsession, the HR playbook. Think like a CXO. CX as a revenue accelerator. CX governance, the boardroom blueprint. CX mastery of C-suite executives unlocking leadership. Excellence in digital transformation. Empowering leaders, customer obsession through emotional intelligence. Elevate CX with generative AI. All those things are going to be happening. Who attends? Board members, CXOs, executive management, directors, entrepreneurs, HODs, individuals overseeing customer experience, IT, HR, digital transformation, governance, risk and compliance. Where? At the Current Country Club in Nairobi. When? From the 27th and the 28th of November. That's tomorrow and?
The next day.
Thursday. At Current Country Club. Only 45,000 shillings investment for you to have this customer experience experience in the journey.
Wow.
Right?
No, what do you mean right?
Right what? You don't get it? It's the Elevating Customer Obsession Leadership Summit 2024. Some of the big speakers will be Dr. Dorothy Cheyune, who is the CEO, Moyo Experience and best-selling author. Pauline Masharia, CEO and founder of Reimagine Plus. They will be there.
Okay.
Now you got the experience?
We do.
Well,
We get the X now.
Yeah? You got to get the X
We get
now.
the X
Yeah.
now.
Somebody got
Yeah.
the experience, somebody got the X.
Very good. Very good. Karibuni sana.
Asante.
Asante.
Now you are here because we are not bang in the middle, but we have launched the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, and your two organizations are really, crucial in these parts. IMLU, as independent medico-legal unit, you do a lot of work in the space of rights violation and looking at victims, and also at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. So you've been doing for what, 30 years now?
Yes, 30 years.
Karibuni sana. Siti,
Asante.
why don't you give them the experience?
Let me transport you to a southern African country, one of the smallest countries on the continent, and it's a kingdom. It was formerly called Swaziland. What is it called now? It's a day for questions and answers. It was formerly known as Swaziland. What is it known as now?
Lesotho.
That is a very good attempt.
Lesotho?
At least you're in the general direction of the country. That's good.
Vivian.
Really?
Switzerland.
I think I'll second Lesotho.
Lesotho. It's very good. It's
Switzerland.
don't listen to Eric. Eric's telling you Switzerland. It is not Switzerland.
You're gaping in a large hole. You're about to walk into it.
Swaziland is now called Eswatini. Yes, you know that these changes. And we were thinking yesterday that perhaps even Kenya, we need to give ourselves another name.
Should change this name.
Because this name,
Kenyan
Kenya, is synonymous with so many negative things. Huh?
Yeah.
You think rebranding helps?
It helps.
Shift Taifa Care?
Yes.
Haven't you seen?
You've not seen now that healthcare is top.
Haven't you seen?
You know, when you call it Taifa Care, it sounds good. You're caring for the nation. Okay?
Even if you're not.
Yes.
Okay.
But the one where you're shafted and sheed, that one wasn't making sense at all.
You're what?
Tuendelee na proverb tafadhali.
Right. The proverb. A person born to be a flower pot will not go beyond the porch.
A person born to be a flower pot will not go beyond the porch. Let's start with you, Vivian. What's your interpretation of this proverb?
Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah.
My first thinking is that you'll not go beyond your level of thinking. I think that's
Excellent.
really...
Excellent. You've said it simply, beautifully said. Thank you. If you limit your thinking, you limit whatever destination you may think you'll reach.
Yeah.
Very good.
Martin.
Well, my interpretation of that is if you don't strive hard in life, then you can't succeed.
If you don't strive hard in life, you
Yes.
can't succeed.
Yeah, simply put, hard work pays. So if you don't work hard, then you may not see any tangible results.
But if you're born as a flower pot, how much harder do you want to work? Be a metallic one?
Well, it simply means that if you're born in a flower pot, what that will mean is that you're used to soft life. But when you get out and face the realities of the world here, then things may actually turn out to be so different.
Isn't
So you
that a
cannot,
wonderful interpretation?
you can't stay in a flower pot forever.
You know, the beauty of these interpretations is someone comes up with something you couldn't have seen. Thank you. Spot on, both of you.
Completely.
Yes.
So what are these 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, Vivian? When do they start? When do they end?
So that starts on the 25th of November and it ends on the 10th of December. And I know probably it has grown popular of recent days, but it began some years back. It began in 1991. And that's because they felt there's need for us to have lots of gender-based advocacy work going around. And so the 25th of November is normally known as the International Day on Elimination of Violence Against Women. So starts on that day, ends on the 10th of December, which is the International Human Rights Day. So in total number is 16 days of activism. It is internationally led by civil society organizations, either within their countries or also across borders. Yeah, that's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And every year there's a theme,
Yes.
just like with all international days.
Yes.
So what's the theme for this year?
This is Unite against violence against women. So #Unite, and the agenda is by 2030 to be able to eliminate all forms of gender-based violence. That's the angle and that's the direction.
We keep talking about this all the time, Martin, and we keep saying so. Every year we are saying we are eliminating violence against women, right? Gender-based violence, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And we have 5 years to go.
Mm-hmm.
In Kenya, there's been a commitment, a presidential commitment, that we shall eliminate gender-based violence by 2026. How are we doing on that, Martin?
Thanks for that question, Latiff. I think as a country, we are not doing so well in terms of eliminating all forms of gender-based violence against women. And that is primarily, when you look at the numbers, between 2016 and 2022, about 520 women lost their lives to gender-based violence. Now, if you look at the statistics of only of this year alone, about 98 women have lost their lives to gender-based violence. And in terms of progressive pieces of legislation, most of the legislation that we have in place to prevent gender-based violence is basically broad, but we do not have a specific piece of legislation that actually criminalizes femicide. And in terms of accountability, there have not been enough strides made as a country in trying to hold perpetrators to account. So when you look at the timeline of 2026 and the stark realities that we're looking at right now, I don't think we're doing so well as a country. And whereas you said there was a presidential directive, including, I think, the promise of, the president donated, about 100 million or something or thereabout. I mean, you have to ask yourself, the question I asked myself when I saw the president, making the donation is, will 100 million eradicate, the issue of gender-based violence comprehensively? As a country, I think we need to allocate more funding to the issue of gender-based violence. There's a lot to be done, but it starts with policy. As a country, we need to come up with, a robust legal framework that actually, a robust legal framework that is actually implemented, and we have to also address the accountability question, because without addressing the accountability question, then you will have, these cases, rising year in, year out.
Why is it so difficult? Because this is one for me, is one of those under the foot kind of wounds that you can't really let it dry, because you have to use the foot every day, isn't it? And that there's the law, there is legislation, there is government, but at the same time, a lot of these the perpetrators think of it, or that perform these acts really, in many times are not held to account. So you can have the law and you can have the framework. That's over here.
Yes.
But those who perpetrate the acts are over here. Why is it so difficult to say, even if you say we're going to end it by what is supposed to be done to end it? Because you can have a legal framework, but the person who's beating up, or the person who's murdering, or the person who's doing whatever is over here. Your framework and you can be over here. But this is happening here. How do we connect the two?
Yes, thanks for that question, Du. I think it's it's actually not extremely difficult, in my opinion. The elephant in the room is this lack of political goodwill from the current government, and even you look at subsequent governments. And the reason why I say that is, you have to ask yourself, what are those efforts that the government of Kenya has made to eradicate gender-based violence? When I mentioned the accountability question, we have to ask ourselves, how many perpetrators of gender-based violence have been held to account within our courts of law today? Coupled with that, there is the aspect of the fact that some of these cases, even against suspects who have been, who are facing trials regarding gender-based violence, these trials, in certain instances, take an inordinate period of time. So, and then there's also the aspect of the digital age, because most of this violence is actually the digital age, in as much as it's an enabler for different issues. Perpetrators have used the digital platforms to lure women, and actually that has given them a leeway of kind of, that has given them unfettered discretion to actually continue perpetrating these crimes. And lastly, the fact that I think there's also laxity with our law enforcement agencies. I just believe, in all due honesty, somebody is not doing the work. And the reason why I say that is because when you look at the budgetary allocations year in, year out, defense always gets the largest share. And our defense and the defense budget is the National Police Service, the National Intelligence Service, and the National Police Service. So we must ask ourselves the hard question. We have a National Police Service that is 100,000 strong. Why do we keep on seeing, rising cases of gender-based violence? If you remember, I told you the statistics between 2016 to 2022 was 570. In this year alone, we haven't even finished the year. We're at 98. So there is a possibility that those numbers could actually even go higher. So from where I see it, I feel like I don't think our law enforcement agencies are doing enough, because they are capable of actually comprehensively dealing with this crime of the crime of femicide and broadly gender-based violence.
Why is it that every time we talk about gender-based violence, we immediately go to security forces? Why? Is it their job? Is it their mandate to deal with these issues?
I think it's their mandate also, but also it's also you and I's mandate. And the law that I really like is the Protection Against Domestic Violence. And what that says, it gives your neighbor, your next door neighbor, the power to also go and report on your behalf. You see, normally people say that I keep hearing my neighbor is being hit, being assaulted by the husband, being assaulted by the lover, ex-lover. You have that mandate according to the law, that you yourself, in the Nyumba Kumi, you can actually go to the police station and say, I've been telling this person to report this, probably the ex-lover, and they have not. Now I think it's important that the law enforcement take this responsibility. But this is also to mention, and I think one of the areas that she's mentioned is, on the other hand, they have the perpetrators, and the other hand, the victims as well. There's a lot of shame also that comes with this aspect of gender-based violence, because people feel that this exposes me so much. Most we know that are happening to women, so they feel that I don't need to report it. This person probably knows a couple of people even in the law enforcement, but I do feel that if people around your neighborhood, if you yourself can take that action and say, let's end gender-based violence, then of course the police will be like, okay, this 10 people have come to report this person, let's register this case.
Let me take a step back. In an African society, in African communities around Kenya, do people actually object and abhor violence against women?
I think they do.
Then why is it that gender-based violence is on the increase? If there's something that they do not like, they do not tolerate. Why?
I still feel that they don't tolerate, but they don't speak out, they don't tolerate it.
That is tolerating.
Yeah.
Because the things that we do not like, or the things that we feel strongly about, we tend to speak.
Exactly.
We tend to act.
Exactly.
Take, for example, what it is that Kenyan parents do for their children. There is nothing a Kenyan parent will not do for their children. They will sell, they'll work 24 hours, they'll do anything. So it's demonstrated. Mm-hmm. And they will also ensure that the children are safe. So now, we go back to gender-based violence. We say, we don't like it, we think it is negative. How exactly do we treat this thing which we say is negative, this thing we do not like? We tolerate it, we give it space, and in some communities it is even normalized. It is considered to be okay. Now, if the environment in which it thrives is one way it is tolerated, anyone growing in that environment will grow up believing that this is something you can tolerate, and in tolerating it is something you can perpetrate.
Yeah, definitely. It's normal.
Yes.
It's normal.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point, because then that of course leads us to conversation as early childhood marriages, leads us to conversation as female genital mutilation aspects, because they say this is cultural. I think we have used culture to cover for violence against women cases.
Yes.
I guess, and that's uncalled for. And I like the theme of this year because it talks about unite. Let's unite, right? And uniting means you putting down what you think is normal to you. Let's unite to what Martin has mentioned about what the law requires of us, because culture in this sense is tolerating and allowing violence against women to seem normal, yet it's not, right? And I think femicide cases is what now we are seeing. And for a long period of time, it was not known exactly what name to give it. But now, over the last couple of years, I think WHO, I think that was 2020, they mentioned and said femicide is the killing of women just because they are women, based on their gender.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with the rising cases of femicide that we have seen, and I think this question has come up really regularly, do we see that people who are dying or who are being killed happen to be women, or are these people being killed because they are women?
Thanks for that question, Du. So when you look at the statistics in the past couple of years, the majority of those who are killed are actually women and young girls. And the context in which they're killed is in context of whereby either they're in a relationship but it clearly points that they're actually killed for in specifically that specific context. So so it's and from where we see it, it's really quite unfortunate that in this day and age that many young girls and women are losing their lives unlawfully in that context. And unfortunately for Kenya, for instance, this year alone, we have lost 98 women and young girls. And in any way, in a progressive democracy, that is not something that should happen. And even when you look at these 98 lives that have been lost, to date, nobody has actually, been fully held to account for. Most of the suspects are either in courts of law or following the judicial process, and yet we have cases cases of femicide on the increase. And that is despite the fact that since the beginning of this year, there's been a lot that has been done by civil society organizations in terms of advocacy. There was a huge march that was done between early January, February, thereabout. So there's been that effort of sensitization and engaging with members of the public just to let them know that, violence against women is actually not accepted, and it's not in any democratic society. It's not.
Allow me to hold on to that femicide issue just for a minute, because essentially what we are saying, if we take these 98 cases into consideration,
yes,
and again going back to that question, that are they being killed because they are women? It's not necessarily the physiological makeup, but we look at the attributes around that relationship or around that circumstance. And by virtue of the fact that they were in a relationship or somebody took another lover, for example, the circumstances around that are the attributes of being a woman. And that is what led to the violence that we are speaking of. Are we looking at what would have been the reasoning around why this life was taken? There was jealousy. I was not able to provide. There was something that would link you directly to being a woman that caused that death to take place. Because we're not saying that there is hate for the gender, are we? No, we're saying that there's a circumstance around this relationship that caused that death or that violence to happen, isn't it?
I will think so, because most of the cases, maybe just to take a back and go to January, if you remember how we began the year, we began it on a very low note, high levels cases of femicide. And let me just pick a case of Mwende's case. Dr. Johansen, after doing the postmortem, he mentioned that I have never seen this form of case. Why? Because this deceased lady who was brutally murdered, let me say, the perpetrator tried to remove the fingernails. And so he's saying, I've never seen this like this before. It is so brutal. You could say that is more targeted. Then let's proceed and move on to the quarry cases. You remember the extractions of bodies from the quarry. And as an institution, as IMLU, we were able to do postmortems of all these cases. So what do the postmortem tell us? That there are 11 females, right, who were dumped and brutally murdered. If you go to the manner in which they murdered, or what could have preceded the murdering, you find that they say that their vaginal, there was a swollen vaginal with, at the right hand, there was a way in which the victim was trying to fight back. So you can see that probably there was gender-based violence that preceded the femicide, right? And so we may think that it began this year, but I think the UNODC and the UN Women 3 years ago, they said Africa has the highest number of femicide cases, but Kenya has 47% contributed to that number. So still, I still think that Kenya is way behind. Also in terms of policy, because there's no policy that now mentions femicide. So it's still treated as a normal homicide case. Yet, if it could be the male gender, probably it was just murder, right? But in a case where there's a woman, then there was something else that preceded the murder. So there's probably what we call sexual torture.
We'll get into that controversial, nice. It's boiling nicely. Martin Mavenjina is a senior program advisor for transitional justice at the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and Vivian Mwende is the head of programs at the Independent Medico-Legal Unit, IMLU. We are marking 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which began yesterday, running until the 10th of December, International Human Rights Day. It's 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. Our guests are Vivian Wen, head of programs at IMLU, and Martin Mavenjina, senior program advisor for transitional justice at the Kenya Human Rights Commission. We were at that point where it's always that thin line in defining what is gender-based violence and what is just other violence, right? How does it qualify to be gender-based violence? And that's what Ndu kept asking. So do we contextualize it and say it is because this person hated you because of your gender, or they did this to you because of your gender? If you think about all the other forms of violence between human beings are constantly in some sort of scuffle or the other, whether you're just fighting among men or among women, man fighting, woman fighting. Because we interact as human beings, we are bound to have conflict, and those conflicts do happen. Some of them are listed in law as these ones are. You actually go astray of the law. But at what point then does it become gender-based violence? It can't be because the two of you are in a house together and you are male and she's female, and you fought, then that has become gender-based?
No. It all goes back to the power dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
And power, just not because you are physically strong, but probably because you also hold a higher position as opposed to the other person. And of course, that comes in the question like sexual harassment, for example, at the workplace. Your supervisor, this is an intern, power dynamics. In the house, this person feels I am more superior than you in physique, for example. So then I'm able to hurt you and there's nothing you're going to do about it. Power dynamics, I know
But in any kind of violence, there's going to be power dynamics.
Yeah.
A big guy like Martin, I can't beat him. He'll beat me.
Sure.
So?
Yeah, and it also draws down to the forms, again, of gender-based violence. Aspects like rape, gang rape, right? Female genital mutilation. I mean, this has not happened to maybe the male gender, FGM, early child marriages. Young girls are being taken and being, the bride price is being paid at the age of 16, at the age of 15, right? Just for the family to get more income. I mean, it also draws down to then what are the forms that leads us to gender-based violence.
Okay.
Well, young boys are subjected to hard labor by their family members. We also call that gender-based violence.
But that isn't violence.
No,
Because we talked about
that's child labor.
No, that's child labor.
Yeah.
okay, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
FGM is FGM. Early marriage is early marriage. Is it GBV?
Actually, no.
Early marriage is not, actually when you look at the laws of the land, early marriage is actually not permissible under our laws. You are only allowed to marry once you attain the age of 18. So
Neither is child labor allowed in law.
yeah, so same to child labor. It's also not acceptable or permitted within the laws of our land. So when you look at some of these retrogressive practices in some of in some retrogressive cultural practices, yes, there are some tribes that continuously practice them, but over the years, civil society organizations have tried to work closely and try to bring an end to this. Of course, the government has put in a few policy and legal frameworks to try to deal with the issue of child labor or early marriages. But when it comes to gender-based violence, Latiff and City and Do, there is no specific piece of legislation that actually criminalizes the crime of, that provides for the crime of genocide. The pieces of legislation that are there in Kenya, like the Sexual Offences Act, are actually broad, so that it's broad application to all Kenyans, all of us here, and that may explain why there are increased cases of gender-based violence. Okay. Because if there is no framework of actually holding you to account for a specific crime, then it simply means that you cannot actually...
Can I push this envelope a little bit?
Yes, you cannot deter people from actually continuously committing that.
Probably one of the reasons is because we just can't seem to completely agree what GBV is. We keep mixing things up. So, for example, you've quoted the case of that very, very unfortunate case of that young girl.
Yeah.
What was her name?
Mwende.
Right? Murdered in the most brutal way by this person, whatever they did. Can we say that she was killed because she's a woman?
And of course, it goes back to, and what I think was mentioned by City before, what preceded, what was happening before. It was an ex-lover. Right, probably they had some issues about this person now has moved on, has another partner, and it's the moment of speaking and arguing, and then that happens. Another situation of, you are the father of my children, you need to provide for your children, even though you've proceeded on with your life. So again, it brings up a situation whereby the woman feels that you've now left me with the children, which is probably the most cases. So now then who is going to provide for them? Again, provides a scenario whereby now you can argue, you can have a heated conversation, like all people do. But now because there is also power dynamics, there is also an aspect of we were once together. Right now you have proceeded and you seem, and of course the lady would be like, now you're proceeding, you've left me with the children, and now you can freely move. Well, I'm here being held back and having to provide. I don't have the financial muscle like you do, again, which is the Kenyan situation. Then it opens a box whereby gender-based violence can happen. And then is it a scenario that is a touch and go? No. In fact, research has showed that most women undergo what we call cycle of violence 7 times for them to come out. And the cycle of violence is where it happens, right? And then you go to a point where the perpetrator says, oh, so sorry that happened. Please don't report me or not do this again. And so you have what the cycle of violence reaches to honeymoon stage. Everything is fine. People see you holding hands together, and your neighbors will see you fighting, and then you're like, oh, these people. And then there's always that saying of people who are on the same bed, right? So again, the cycle of violence continues. Then all of a sudden, the perpetrator changes. You start walking to what we call the stage of eggshells. So now you're worried. You're like, oh my God, I don't want this to happen again because it has happened again. And then the perpetration now happens. The offense happens. Maybe it's assault, the psychological and the emotional abuse, whatever abuse it is. That is the first cycle. So the research shows that this particular woman undergoes 7 times that cycle before they actually go to the next police station and say, guys, I have been undergoing gender-based violence. So even as we see women report, there is so much that they have undergone before. 7 cycle. And the 7 cycle can be 1 year, can be 6 years, can be 20 years. And of course, as a society, we are like, hey, come out of that marriage. Hey, come out of that relationship.
But you know something?
Yeah.
You paint a picture that explains what we are talking about with clarity.
Yeah.
But I'd like us to take just a step back. What is it that were the influences in these 2 people's lives? What is it that molded them to become the people they are? We talk about social norms, societal influences, and so forth. But we look at a country like ours, and you look at some of the things that have been inherent. There are communities that feel they were discriminated against. There are people who feel that they were never given a fair shake of it. There are people who feel that their poverty is as a result of the government they've elected mismanaging their resources. There are communities who feel everything that I've just said and they feel it is them. Now, if you grow up in whatever community with this particular feeling, you've actually been violated and you probably don't know. You've actually been brutalized, but you actually don't know. So your natural reaction when something doesn't work is to do the same as was done to you. You brutalized. This is something that researchers have found over and over and documented, and then some. But look at what is happening now and look at the correlation of the brutalization that has been brought about by the socioeconomic situations we have in this country and the direct correlation with what we see as these violent episodes that when we look at the sum total, we say it's against women. Why? People who are brutalized focus on people who are weaker, not stronger. People who are disadvantaged, people who are dependent, because some of this violence is also directed at children.
Yeah.
Now, if we focus on what we see and we do not give adequate attention to why it is what it is, because this situation is escalating, it's accelerating, it's not going down.
Exactly.
Agreed.
So if I may, Siti, while I do agree, while I partly agree with you that yes, I mean the context in which we all citizens or all Kenyans growing, you may indirectly face some forms of violation. The stark reality is that when people grow up in different environments and different backgrounds. Now, a man and a woman are brought together by basically they're attracted to one another through, let's say, basically by emotions. So you start a relationship, and then before you know it, things go haywire. But in most instances, most of these cases actually, in fact, I think maybe there are certain instances, maybe 5 or 10%, whereby you have somebody who is just obsessed about, committing crime. For instance, if you look at the quarry killings that Vivian had mentioned, and the suspect that was arraigned, we were meant to believe that this is somebody who used to lure women and just, kill them, not necessarily having a relationship with them. So in society, there could be those bad apples, whereby there's somebody who's just obsessed about, preying on women and actually ending their lives. But the bulk of the gender-based violence cases usually emanate from a relationship. There must be a relationship of some sorts that actually goes haywire at some point in time. So, but that cannot be attributed to the different violations that maybe the country has subjected us to. Because
why not?
That's primarily because, yes, in as much as the Constitution places a burden on the state, to ensure to ensure that all Kenyans enjoy all the rights that are enshrined under Chapter 4. I mean, there's that degree of expectation that you would expect a country to do, or there's a degree of things that you would expect them to do. They cannot, outrightly deal with all our problems comprehensively, or all the problems that many people in society face comprehensively, but there must be progression. But when you look at the stark reality that we face in Kenya here is there's, if you remember Ali said, there's lack of political will. From where I sit, I want to believe that if the government woke up today and said, moving forward, we are going to comprehensively deal with sexual gender-based violence or gender-based violence, then that is a thing that they can comprehend.
May I? Sorry.
Sure.
I think that, and maybe you can help me out. I think that if government woke up one day and said that we are going to comprehensively deal with a mental health issue that we have in the country, I think that would be a marked, significant difference from what we see. Because I have to go to maybe a few years ago when we saw rampant cases of women who were taking manhood, who were cutting off men's manhood, right? They were cutting them off. There were men who died. There were men who were rendered literally dead because of what was happening. It was rampant. You have an argument with a man, you get a knife, the next thing, it's gone. Right? What did we label that? What did we label that? Did we start to say that there's an increase of violence against men perpetuated by women? And were we now saying that men were dying because they are men. So when we look at this gender picture, how are we looking at it? And I think the things that cause a lot of the violence that we see is not necessarily because people woke up one day and said, I'm going to wield an axe. I think they're compacted mental health issues that are affecting people, and you will take it out on the weaker individual at that moment in that relationship. We can talk about government and legal frameworks, but I think that there's a lot of unpacking on the social point that we have to do.
In fact,
whether it is in school, whether it is in social groups, taking the mental health issue into because police can shoot guns for years.
We'll come up with all the laws.
We can come up with laws. But you can imagine a boy or a girl who's grown up seeing violence every single day. What do you think they're going to do when they grow? Or are faced with a situation whereby it's the only way out?
Yeah, that's partly right, too. But you see, the sad, the long and short of it is that, again, the state cannot abdicate its duty to its citizens. Violence can only happen on a daily when the state has actually deliberately decided to abdicate its duties. There is a question that City asked earlier. Why do we why do we think this is an obligation of the police? Now, when you look at our constitution, the police is primarily tasked with maintaining law and order. That is why all of us citizens pay taxes. That is why every 5 years we elect leaders to serve for and on behalf of their citizens. And by doing so, they are given a specific obligation to ensure that all of us are actually, have a good governance structure, that we're all safe and secure. So it can't be that, we have elected leaders, you have citizens paying taxes, and then you still want to place that obligation on the very citizens who are actually paying taxes and who have actually elected leaders to actually serve in different positions. So the long and short of it is that those tasked with those in positions of authority cannot actually abdicate that duty, because they must ensure that all Kenyans are able to be in a safe and secure environment. Because if we go on because the long and short of it is, if we proceed like this, then you must ask yourself, in all due honesty, who actually is sleeping on the job?
Martin,
right?
the law will not solve this issue.
No, it's not the law. We are talking about those with, when you have a duty to perform a certain... Yes.
Those who have a duty are the police.
Yes.
How are we dealing with FGM? We have a law on FGM. How are we doing? The police, the Ngaos are there with FGM. How are we doing? I keep arguing, we don't look back at why do communities continue practicing FGM? Because with high literacy levels in this country, and you will find even people who are exposed to some level of education would still go back and practice FGM. We don't ask ourselves those questions. Same thing, we're not asking ourselves, so what is this GBV? The victim, like you've said, it's power. Are we saying that this violence only happened from one person to the weaker person? Or was it happening among the two, but then the stronger person prevailed? What is it that's happening in this home that is leading to this kind of violence? Is it only one directional?
Thank you for bringing the name home, because gender is not sex, right? Gender is the roles and responsibilities, right? Based on your sex. So as you grow up, you are given, probably when you are playing with the boys around your neighborhood and your girls, it is automatic that the girl will be told, start cooking at that corner. The boys are going to fetch some water for you, or alternatively from other areas, the woman or the young girl is told, please take the water and come and cook. And these are kids, and the parents comfortably will say that, you guys just play, and no, let him drive. He's done to drive, but you girls stay back at home. So these people grow up, right? And then now they find themselves in that house, either as boyfriend and girlfriend, for example. And then, of course, the financial muscle comes in, whereby it's almost automatic that you're the one now to go out and look for that. Go out and look for the food of this house. Then I'll remain and take care of the children. And that's why later then, takes back to what I was mentioning, this woman is finding herself, most instances, having to speak and to say that, what do I do with these children whom now you've left me with? maintenance issues around emotional torture, trying to gaslight you, and of course the mental issues. It's agreeable, but let's not give a reason as to why gender-based violence should happen.
No, we should. We should seek to explain why it's happening.
Yes,
We can't
exactly.
run away from it.
Yeah.
Well, this conversation must continue for the next 14 days. Today is the second of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. What is it? Why do we see it happening? Why do we see a rise in cases of gender-based violence, even femicide in this country? Mavenjina is a senior program advisor in charge of transitional justice at Kenya Human Rights Commission. Vivian Mwende is head of programs at the Independent Medico-Legal Unit.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.